Following the first presidential debate, Joe Biden's odds of retaining the White House has fallen to its lowest point ever. In fact, he has a less than 1 in 5 chance of keeping his job. On top of that, national polling is sending a similar story. Trump now leads by nearly 3 points nationwide, his largest margin since January of this year. In this video, we're going to take a look at the best case scenario for the former president in this November's consequential election by filling in the 2024 electoral map based on the most favorable recent poll for Donald Trump from every single state. For example, we're going to begin with Washington, where most polls do in fact show Biden ahead, but we're going to pick out the most favorable one for Donald Trump, and we are going to include any polls that include Kennedy or polls that don't include him. And looking at this poll conducted by the Independent Center, Trump leads Biden by 5 percentage points, which will make Washington a likely red state. Down in Oregon, things are a bit better for the incumbent president, as according to the most favorable poll for Trump, Biden still leads by 11 percentage points, which will place the state of Oregon into the likely Democratic category. In California, though, this is one of the bluest states in the country, and even the most favorable poll has the incumbent president leading by 18%. State of California, the Golden State, is going to be solid on our map. Now, moving on to Nevada and Arizona, our first two competitive states, and two states where just in the polling average alone, Trump has already maintained a pretty strong edge. Just look at the polling going all the way back to March of this year. Donald Trump has continuously been ahead in the Silver State of State. Might I remind you that Joe Biden won in the 2020 election by a 2-point margin. Now, Trump is expected to perform even better than Biden. And so when we look at the polling, I mean, virtually every single poll shows a Trump lead. And the most favorable one has the former president ahead by 8 points. And so that will make the state of Nevada likely Republican. In Arizona, the polling is pretty similar. On average, the former president actually leads by 5 points. And again, there's never been a point where Biden has come close to overtaking Trump in the polling average. And looking at the polls, I mean, every single one of them is red. The most favorable one, conducted by P2 Insights, has Trump leading by 11 points, which will make it just barely under that solid threshold. Before we continue, only 10% of you guys are actually subscribed, so please take the time to subscribe right now for more content like this leading up to the election in November. Moving on to Colorado and New Mexico, two states that Biden did pretty well in the last election, two states that haven't voted Republican since the election of 2004, although in 2024, these two states can definitely get at least somewhat competitive. Looking at the polling in Colorado, Biden is doing okay, a pretty mediocre performance considering the fact he did win this state by 14 points in the last election, but the recent polling hasn't been the best. Biden leads by just 4% in Trump's most favorable poll, and so that is going to place the state of Colorado into the lean Democratic category. And New Mexico is even going to be more competitive. Looking at the polling here, the most favorable poll for Donald Trump, this was conducted by the National Republican Senatorial Committee. It shows the incumbent president leading by just 1 percentage point. And looking at all the polling throughout this election cycle, it just keeps getting worse and worse for Joe Biden. So the state of New Mexico is going to be in the tilt Democratic column. It's going to be one of the more surprisingly competitive states of this cycle. And in Texas, 40 electoral votes, the Lone Star State. This is a must-win for Donald Trump, and it is a big prize. He only won it by 5 points last time, which is the smallest margin for a Republican going all the way back to the 1980s, 1990s. Really was not the best performance by the former president. However, today, he leads by 8 points in the polling, and looking at his most favorable poll, Donald Trump was ahead by 12 points from a poll conducted all the way back in April. If you look at the polling for Texas from the 2020 election, you'll see even in the end, Trump was only expected to win by 1.1%. Of course, he won by 5 times that margin, and so the fact that he's ahead now by 8.3% means that he's almost guaranteed to win the state. A lot of Democrats really want Texas to flip, and potentially maybe in 20, 30 years that could happen, but right now there's no chance that Texas goes blue, and so the state is going to be solid red on our map. Now moving on to the states in the middle of the country here, we've seen polls that show Trump ahead by solid margins. There's no doubt. States of Utah, Wyoming, Idaho, Montana, North and South Dakota, the entirety of Nebraska with the exception of the 2nd District, as well as Kansas and Oklahoma. They were all solid for Trump in 2020, and the polling for 2024 reconfirms that. And the only competitive region here is the 2nd District of Nebraska. And looking at the polling here, one poll shows Biden up by 5, the other one shows Trump up by 3, and that's the one we're going to go with on this map. The 2nd District of Nebraska is going to be lean Republican. And so before we move on to the eastern half of the U.S., we're going to finish off Alaska and Hawaii. Alaska obviously is going to be a very solid red state, while in Hawaii, the polling really is very surprising here. The most favorable poll for Donald Trump shows Biden ahead by just 8 percentage points. You put in RFK Jr., and Biden's margin falls from 19 all the way down to 8. And this is a pretty disastrous poll for the incumbent president, considering that he did win the Aloha State by 30 points in 2020. And a lot of this is a result of his poor handling of the Maui fires, where he basically let the people in Hawaii out to dry. And so that's really had an impact on his performance in the state. He's really not as popular as he should be, considering that he is a Democrat, and Hawaii is one of the bluest states in the entire country. Now we're going to move on to the Midwest, which is going to be one of the most consequential regions in this election. We have 3 very important states, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. If Joe Biden wins these 3 states, he is probably going to be reelected. If Donald Trump wins 2, maybe even just one of these states, if it's Pennsylvania, he is almost guaranteed to get reelected as well. So we're going to start off with Minnesota, a state that hasn't voted Republican since the election of 1972, which was the reelection of Richard Nixon. However, looking at the polling now, Biden leads by just 1.7%. 2024 could be the year where Minnesota finally flips. And when looking at the polling, I mean, this really is not what you want to see. There's a lot of red. The most favorable poll conducted by McLaughlin, this is a Trump campaign-sponsored poll, it does actually show Donald Trump leading by 5%. And even if you look at the most recent Emerson College poll, Trump actually leads by 1% if you include Kennedy. So there's really no other way to spin it. Donald Trump is performing very well in Minnesota, and considering the fact that he came within 2 points of actually winning it in 2016, it really is very possible that this state does indeed flip this November. But for this map, Minnesota is going to be in the likely Republican category. Down in Iowa, 6 electoral votes. The most favorable poll has Donald Trump leading by 18 points. He flipped the state in 2016 after it voting for Obama in both 2008 and 2012, but now it's one of the most Republican states in the country. Iowa, Trump plus 18, it's going to be solid red. Up in Wisconsin, now this state is going to go down to the wire. Biden won it by 0.6% in the last election. It was the 3rd closest state in the entire country. And today, Donald Trump leads by 1% in the polling, and according to his most favorable poll, he leads by 3 points. Now, this is still pretty significant considering the fact that in 2020, Joe Biden was supposed to win Wisconsin by 8.4%, and like I said earlier, he only won it by 0.6. So the fact that Trump is even ahead right now says really quite a lot about how much has shifted in the state of Wisconsin over the last 4 years. So on our map, it is going to be lean Republican. Illinois is not going to be solid for Joe Biden, despite being a solid blue state in each of the last 4 elections. Today, however, the most favorable poll for Donald Trump shows Biden leading by just 9%, which will place it very firmly into the likely Democratic category. Indiana obviously is a very red state, one of the most Republican in the entire country, so really no point in looking too closely into that. However, up in Michigan, we do have a very important race, the Wolverine State, 15 electoral votes. Donald Trump leads by 1.8% in the average. He has expanded his lead after retaking it just a few weeks ago. And looking at the most favorable poll for Donald Trump, he's ahead by 4%. I mean, just look at this entire list of polls. Donald Trump has led in basically every single poll that's been conducted in the month of June. So the state is going to be in the lean Republican category. Down in Ohio, obviously it's going to be solid here as well for the Republicans. Trump leads by 9 points on average, but according to his most favorable poll, he is leading by 12 points over Joe Biden. Ohio, the Buckeye state, is going to be solid red. And now in the Keystone State of Pennsylvania, 19 electoral votes. This is a must-win state for Joe Biden. There's really no conceivable way he gets to 270 electoral votes without it, unless he can somehow win Georgia and Arizona. And looking at the polling here, things are not looking too great for Joe Biden. 2 points is the lead for Donald Trump right now. And if you look at his most favorable poll, the former president is ahead by 4%, which will place the third blue wall state into the lean red category. Moving on to the Northeast, many of these states are still going to be solid for Biden, so I'm just going to fill them in. I mean, right now on this map so far, we have only had one solid Democratic state, and that is, of course, California. However, Biden is still on track to winning Vermont, Massachusetts, Delaware, Maryland, and the District of Columbia by at least 12 points, although the remaining states are going to be a lot more competitive. So starting off with New York, 28 electoral votes, a state where Democrats have really fallen over the last few years. Keep in mind, Biden won this state by 23 points in the last election. Now he leads by 9 points on average, and according to Trump's most favorable poll, he is only behind by 7 points, and this poll was conducted by Emerson College, which is one of the best pollsters in the country. So New York is going to be likely Democratic. We're seeing similar margins in both Connecticut and Rhode Island. Just look at the polling here. Biden plus 9 in Connecticut, and in Rhode Island, Trump's most favorable poll has the incumbent president leading by just 7 points. Both of these states will be likely blue as well. New Jersey, though, this is actually one of the biggest surprises. Donald Trump leads in the most recent poll from the state of New Jersey. Kennedy's at 7%. Trump leads by 1% in the state overall. We had 2 Emerson polls previously in March that showed Biden ahead by 5 points with Kennedy, 6 points without him. But, I mean, even this poll was pretty abysmal for the Biden campaign. I mean, him leading by just 5 points in a state that he won pretty handily by a 16-point margin 4 years ago. This just shows you just how much Biden has fallen in the last few years. New Jersey is going to be tilt Republican. Up in New Hampshire, this state is going to be very competitive as well. I mean, just look at 2016. Donald Trump came within half a percentage point of flipping the Granite State. Republicans haven't won it since the Bush era. And if you look at the polling right now, Donald Trump could be the next Republican to win New Hampshire. He leads by 2% in the most recent poll, and this is the most favorable one for the former president, which means that New Hampshire will be placed into the lean Republican category. And finally, up here in Maine, in the state as a whole, the most favorable poll has Trump up by 6%, while in the first district, Biden leads by 8, and in the second district, Trump leads by 20. So the state as a whole is going to be likely Republican, the second district will be solid red, and the first district likely blue. And now to finish off the map here in the Southeast, we're going to fill in all of the solid Trump states first: Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, and South Carolina. No doubt these states are going to be solid red. Now moving on to our 4 final states, we will begin with Virginia, 13 electoral votes. According to 2 of the most recent polls, there's actually a tie between the 2 candidates, and it actually seems like RFK Jr. being in the race is actually helping out Joe Biden. And so since this is a best case scenario for Donald Trump, we have 2 even races according to 2 of the most recent polls. We're going to place it into the tilt Republican category. Now moving on to North Carolina, 16 electoral votes. 7 points is Trump's lead on average. However, according to his most favorable poll, he's actually ahead by 12 points, according to North Star Opinion Research. So this is going to place the Tar Heel state into actually the solid Republican category. I mean, looking at these two states, just compared to the margins from the last election, Virginia, Biden won by 10, North Carolina, Trump won by just 1%. So we're essentially seeing a 10-point swing in both of these races from just 4 years ago. Now, in Georgia, 16 electoral votes. This was the closest state of the election and a state that Joe Biden actually won. 6.6% is Trump's lead right now on average, but according to his most favorable poll, he's actually ahead by 10%, a double-digit margin. Georgia will easily be in the likely Republican category. And finally, in Florida, 30 electoral votes, the Sunshine State. This is one of Trump's biggest prizes, and it used to be a really important battleground state. That is no longer the case. Trump leads by 9 points in the polling average, and if we look at his most favorable poll, he is actually ahead by 13 points, according to YouGov and CBS. So the Sunshine State of Florida will be placed into the solid Republican category. And so according to the most favorable polls for Donald Trump that have been conducted in the last few months, he is on track to winning 368 electoral votes to Joe Biden's 170. I mean, Trump is just absolutely dominating all across the map. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure you like it down below if you enjoyed it. Comment down below who you think is going to win the 2024 election and just how many electoral votes can Trump win in his best case scenario. And subscribe right now for more content like this leading up to the election in November.